And welcome back to the show. The Miss Foundation for Women is devoted to securing rights, equality, and justice for women. Now, the organization fights to eliminate barriers and fight to secure the same opportunities for all women in the U.S. They work to bring attention to the real challenges facing women, especially women of color, low-income women, and women living in poverty or working from paycheck to paycheck. Here sharing more is the Vice President of Advancement at the Miss Foundation for Women, Ruth McFarlane. And Ruth, great to have you.
I'm thrilled to be here. It's really great.
Thank you. So for somebody who does not know literally about the organization, I gave a little bit of an intro, but can you share with us a little bit more?
Yeah, so we've been around now for almost 50 years. And so there's an origin story and there's a today story.
Mm-hmm.
And the origin story is really exciting. It's four women came together to found the Ms. Magazine, which at the time in the 70s was a cutting edge national magazine. It was the first magazine that took women's issues really seriously and expanded them beyond the domestic to political and all the other things that women want to think about with respect to their lives and the change that was happening in society at that time around women's rights. And those women were Gloria Steinem, Marlo Thomas, Letty Cotton Pogrebin, and Patricia Carbine. Well, they decided they're going to start a foundation from the Ms. Magazine, and that's how the Ms. Foundation started. And the agenda was really to make sure that resources got to women leading grassroots change across the country in little regions of the country, maybe in little towns, making sure those women got resources and making sure those women got to understand they were part of an ecosystem. And if you go forward now, decades later, it's what the Ms. Foundation is still doing today. The big change, I think, around how we do our work today is that we very explicitly center the lives of women and girls of color. So we talk about addressing issues that affect the lives of women and girls of color and use that gender plus race framework to orient under the feminist umbrella, kind of how we think about making change in the world. We're still making grants. We're still funding first and early and trying to get money to the field, you know, maybe before other foundations and philanthropic groups have really made note of a leader in a particular region. And so this is a very exciting place, certainly for me to be working right now. And at this point in our history, it just feels like the United States is just really ready to have this conversation about gender and racial justice.
Yeah, and I was, really looking at where we are as a country, and we're talking more about, women and equality. We're seeing more and more, from an African American and Asian that's now of Asian descent, who's also now the Vice President of the United States, to seeing many different things that are occurring right now that, if looked several years ago, aren't happening. Much is because of policy, and much is because of advocacy. Talk to me about the policy perspective of your work and how you really look to deal with policy.
Yeah, we support both at the federal and state level policy and legislation that is advancing where women need to be going next, where we need to be looking next to advance our equity. And that's across the sectors of safety, around health, and around economic justice. So when we talk about safety at Ms., we think very broadly. It's, of course, we're really interested in the issues of domestic violence. The Me Too movement is something that we have been very closely aligned with and funding into. Making sure that we're thinking about safety in terms of state-sanctioned violence. So we have funded organizations, for example, started by girls in response to some of what Black girls saw in their schools when school security and police actually were violent to students. And you can remember some of these incidents that we've seen in the news over the last few years. Well, in some cases, it's youth actually that respond to these situations and are raising up these issues. And so we're making sure those make it to the policy and legislative level by supporting and amplifying that. We're also in the economic justice space, thinking about policies that can advance further investment into the efforts and leadership of women and girls, whether that is, and this will really illustrate the breadth of our movement-based, our movement support, whether that's the Equality Act, which is really focused on, advancing opportunity and equity for LGBT folks, or that is the ERA, which is a piece of legislation that's been with us for a very, very long time and still alive, and looks at equity more broadly for women. And so we are, as a national organization, as the oldest national women's fund, we really do have a broad scope in the type of policy advocacy that we are doing. And with the new administration in the White House, it's really, really exciting to have a seat at that table, have a prominent seat at that table, and be able to advise as they are shaping their platform and their agenda around gender.
Yeah, you kind of answered my question because I know that, previous presidential administration, there was not much by way of equality or conversations. In fact, it was more the degrading of women.
That's
Now
right.
that we've got new leadership, new political leadership, are you optimistic that a lot will take place in terms of really dealing with the issues concerning women, and more particularly when it comes to that women's pay gap?
Absolutely. I think it's one, it's on everybody's mind, but it's absolutely part of this administration's agenda. They formed a council that is specifically looking at these issues, and we are part of the advisory board for that council. And it is absolutely part of the agenda of this administration to make sure that when we come out of these 4 years, we've seen not just a repair of some of the things that have been taken apart in the last administration, but also forward movement. And I think I would be remiss in not mentioning, the impact of the pandemic on the economic status and the economic experience of women. Really can't be understated. I think the pandemic brought to bear some of the gaps that were there all along, right? Some of the issues, some of the fraying or the absence of a social safety net. We really saw those gaps and that fraying result in dire consequences during the pandemic. And I know the administration is focused on that information as well. Yeah, I could talk about that quite a bit. I don't know if you saw it, there was a really great article today released by S&P Global
Mm.
on, it's an economic analysis of the United States looking at where our economy would be today had we not blocked and challenged the advancement of Black women educationally, in the workforce, et cetera. And what they found was we left $507 billion on the table
Mm.
because of the ways in which we have seen these gaps. And that's just between Black women and white women, right? And of course, there are women of many other types of experience and experiencing challenges as well. So I think as we start to look, I think the administration is focused on this and others are as well, as we start to look at what does it mean? What do we learn if we look at our economic well-being through this lens of gender and race at the same time? What might we do differently, and how might we be even more successful and stronger as a nation?
Yeah. I want to talk about the pandemic for a moment. And obviously, for you as an organization, what was it like for you being able to still meet up with, those that you're serving and staying connected during a time when we were in severe isolation?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was even just as a staff, it has been a learning curve. So our offices are based in Brooklyn, but I'm the first executive that's remote. And so I'm based out in Oakland, California.
Mm.
And I was remote before the pandemic. And so it was really interesting to have the rest of my colleagues kind of spread out across the country and begin to come to each other the way we are through these screens. It was interesting. We were in February, right before the pandemic, about to roll out funding called the Activist Collaboration Fund. And the
Mm.
intention of that fund was to really allow leaders and activists on the grassroots level to convene and gather in the way they needed to do. It was an ask we had received, come together how we want to get the work we need to get done. And as we were rolling that out, the pandemic hit, and we had to learn instantly how to turn our grant making into a response to what was happening right now for people. So that really, it was a challenge, but it was an opportunity. And over the course of the last year, we were able to offer that particular fund, two more times. It was intended to be a one-time pilot for the year, and we actually did it 3 times last year. And it allowed our program folks to just stay really closely connected to leaders as things changed from day to day, as needs changed from day to day, so that we could remain informed and both help and get resources to the ground, but also elevate those stories up to philanthropy so that the philanthropic sector could remain closely connected and responsive to what was going on.
Hmm. Give me a little bit about immigration. I want to talk about that for a minute as well. Because when we talk about immigration, that was a huge issue in the last presidential administration. It still remains a topic of great challenge and controversy. But I know you're pretty boots on the ground with this issue right here, too.
Yeah, we are. And, and it's important that we are, because very frequently the lives and the issues impacting the lives of immigrant women are not those that rise to the surface. They're not the stories that necessarily get told in the media. One of the organizations that we funded for a long time is the Garment Workers Center in Los Angeles. And that is a group, largely immigrant women, who are working in the garment sector. And resourcing and this is just one grantee. Right now we support over around 100 organizations, but this is just one story of one grantee and a group of women really focused on making sure that workers' rights are being attended to, but then the lives of those communities are being attended to. So when the pandemic hit, they pivoted from being an advocacy organization to also making sure people got food, to making sure that local lawmakers were aware of the circumstances of those people's lives. And I think that's what's happening across the country. I think of another organization we have funded historically in New York called Adhikar, and they respond to the local community there in Queens to make sure, again, that the needs of these people are being attended to in specificity by local politicians.
And when we talk about immigration, I talk about immigration and rights, and there's also reproductive rights, and that's a battle that continues to be contended with right now. Have you made any progress in that area?
Yeah, I would say a few things. One, it's interesting, it's progress and it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? So we know there's a case pending now in front of the Supreme Court that will be a direct challenge to Roe v. Wade. And so we're watching that very, very closely and working to make sure that we rally across the nation, all of the organizations, activists, and other platforms that can get folks really educated about what's at stake here, so that we can make sure that we really raise the voices around that case as it's going through and people are aware of what's at stake. But on the flip side, we for years now have done really great work funding as it was sort of emerging, the work of reproductive justice, which goes beyond reproductive rights, but also looks at the lives of parents, the needs of, inclusive of childcare, inclusive of the resources you need to parent well, to make choices about whether or not to have children. And if you choose to have children, how to take good care of them, right? We're currently working on a project in the birth justice space with several close allies in our work. And that will look at funding groups that are really attending to access to maternal health care, care before the birth, care after the birth, and even the more broad space, again, of reproductive justice.
Yeah. What do you want us to know? As an organization, obviously, you do some great work and you continue to do and have your fingers on the pulse of a lot of great things. What is it that you would want our viewers to know about the organization?
I think the thing, well, we released a really exciting publication last summer that we're still talking about, and we've seen a lot of uptake in the media, called Pocket Change: How Women of Color Are Doing More with Less. And that publication is available on our website. But what it really highlights is across philanthropy, the investment in leadership of women and girls of color has not been great. It really hasn't. It's been, in fact, embarrassing. And what we found was about 0.5% of all of the philanthropic funds flowing to the field, this was based on 2017 data, about 0.5% ended up going to women and girls of color, organizations led by women and girls of color. And what that comes out to is cents per person, per woman of girl of color, per year. So a coffee maybe.
Right.
But that's I raised that publication and I raised that issue to say that what I want people to understand is as we go into this year, into this new summer, after the summer we had last year, and we're reminiscing about where we were last year and the type of social uprising we saw and the concern we saw, especially around racial justice in this country, the issues that got us to that moment took a long time to come together. And the type of the problems that we are addressing today in our country around race and around gender took a long time in the making. And we need to be steadfast and diligent about fixing those problems. It cannot be a 1 year, you know, enthusiasm,
Right, right.
right? We need to see the 0.5% investment. And I will say that is actually the same in the VC space. So Black women entrepreneurs, same, half a percentage. We need
Mhm.
to see that go up dramatically, and we need to see a consistent spotlight being shone on the leadership of women and girls of color and a consistent investment in this space.
In other words, a long-term investment.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. For people who want more information, how they get in contact with you.
Well, they can go to our website. It's www.forwomen.org.
All righty. Well, Ruth McFarlane, I want to thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums, and we appreciate your conversation and continue to update us, and we'll update our viewers.
All right. Sounds great. It was good to be with you.
All righty. We are taking a quick break. We encourage you to stay with us. We have more on the Social Justice Forums. We'll be right back in a few.